every time was going to be the last time. And I wasn't just saying that to be flippant or to lie to others. I mean, I was lying to myself, but I believed the lie that this is going to be the last time. I tell people, I feel like I found 1,000 different ways to fall into the same sin.
Hey guys, I am so excited to share with you yet another exciting conversation in this series that we are doing on getting free or breaking free from pornography. I've got an amazing guest here who is going to share his testimony of what God did in his life and what God is going to continue to do. But before we do that, I just want to share with you once again a tool that I have been using for many, many years to enable me to stay clean from pornography. It's called Covenant Eyes. There is a link in the description below where you can get 30 days for free. You can try it out all for free, right? For 30 days. Just make sure that you use the promo code Parr. And before we jump into this interview, here is a quick description of it. Covenant Eyes is the software platform that I use to personally ensure that I don't fall into the temptation to view pornography. Once you download the app on all of your devices, Covenant Eyes will take a screenshot of any questionable activity or website that you visit, blur it out, and if you have an ally set up, send that information to your ally to hold you accountable for what you view. Inside your settings, you can select how often you want your ally to receive a detailed report of your online activity. In addition to having allies to hold you accountable, you can be an ally to someone else and see their online activity as well and help them experience true freedom. Finally, you can also set up filtering that will block you from visiting certain sites that are inappropriate. Try it for 30 days free and experience true freedom by clicking the link below this video and using the promo code Parr. Hey Beat family, I am so excited to share with you today and introduce you to a new friend of mine whose name is Nick Stumbo. He was a pastor who was struggling with pornography, and he is here today to share his testimony of how God enabled him to overcome that struggle, and most importantly, how he is using that to help other people, pastors, ministers, and regular Christians to experience freedom from this addiction. So I'm so excited that he is here. And so hopefully you guys will give him a warm welcome. Nick, how are you doing today, man? Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, doing great. Thanks, Alan. Really good to be here and looking forward to this vital and not had often enough conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I know this is something that you and I are both very passionate about. I get emails and text messages and voicemails and direct messages and comments on a lot of my videos from men and women who are really, really struggling with this addiction. And so I know our heart is both our hearts are in the right place to really want to help people. So guys, if you're watching this on the replay, all the timestamps to this particular conversation are going to be in the description. Hopefully you'll watch the entire testimony. It's going to be very, very powerful. But if you want to jump around, then the timestamps are below. So with that being said, we're not going to waste your time. I want to jump right in. Nick, just tell us a little bit about how you were first exposed to pornography. At what point were you exposed to it, and how did it develop into a habit and then ultimately an addiction?
Sure. I grew up in a good Christian family in rural Wyoming. And like is, I think, common actually in a lot of people's stories, I was over at a friend's house. And long after his parents had assumed we'd gone to bed, they were up in their living room watching a very inappropriate movie. It wasn't a pornography film, but definitely R-rated and beyond anything I had ever seen. And we had crept back up the stairs and were watching it, just our little heads peeking over the stairs. And it was really the first time in my life I had seen nudity and sexual images. And, my brain just exploded with these questions of like, what is this and what's going on? And also that awareness of whatever this is, I'm sure I can't tell my parents, because I know if they knew, they'd be disappointed. They probably wouldn't let me come to this friend's house anymore. And so, as is so often the case in this kind of area, it began as something really that I wasn't looking for, wasn't trying to find, but was exposed to. didn't know what to do with it. And so my brain kind of filed it away into this secretive place of, well, don't tell mom and dad, but I'm really curious to see more of that. Over the next couple of years, it would probably be things like a Sears catalog or the department store lingerie ads, just as my brain started to understand sexuality and lust, that desire to see more and more. But when I was really first exposed to full blown pornography, we were actually on a family vacation, and we were at this huge, like outdoor sales bazaar or flea market. And I happened to walk by this table, and there was a stack of Playboy magazines for sale. And in my little brain, the idea of actually buying a magazine felt wrong. Like, it'd be embarrassing. I'd be admitting I have a problem because I want to see it. So while I thought that would be wrong, somehow my brain also justified that I should just steal one because I so badly wanted to look inside. I ended up stealing one from that table, hiding it in my, bags, and then later that night, looking at pornography. And that just took, the obsession to a whole new level. Understanding there were magazines that were filled with this stuff. And by that time I was 14, 15 years old. And I was a teenager in the mid 90s. So just as my maturity, my brain chemicals and hormones are kind of starting to really escalate is also when the internet is coming of age. And so it was shortly after that, finding out that many of these same pictures and hundreds of more beside were available online and for free. And so that pattern of seeking out an image and scrolling, and in those days of the dial-up era, for others who are old enough to remember that, even the slow progression of a dial-up photo being exposed across your computer screen actually became part of the attraction, that anticipation of what I was going to see next, and that you had to have delayed fulfillment. It just continued to escalate the behavior, so that I would say in my later teenage years is the point somewhere it had really become addictive in terms of, all along the way, knowing that I wanted to honor God. I mean, I had a very active faith. I would say I was determined not to live this double life. And so in my thinking, every time was going to be the last time. Like, okay, I was just curious and that was wrong, but I'll never do it again. And yet finding myself stuck in this at least monthly pattern, if not more, of going back to those images, going back to that material that I'd promised God and even others at this point that I would never go back to again. And so that's kind of the progression of it in those early years.
Yeah. No, that's a similar story to a lot of people. Particularly, you and I are probably around the same age. I'm 46, and so when I grew up,
yeah, I'm 44.
44, right? See, so when we grew up, for those of you who are watching this, and sadly, you're living in a day and age where we're all living in a day and age where it's accessible, right? It's accessible, it's anonymous, and it's affordable. Those are the 3 A's, right? You can get to it easily, it's affordable, it's free, you don't have to pay for it, and it's anonymous. Nobody has to know, right? And so it's right there on your phone. And so let me just ask you this, Nick. So whenever you were consuming this, in the early years when we weren't able to, it wasn't as accessible, was it more so the magazines and some images, or were you able to get access to like full-length movies? Did you seek it out? When you were 18, did you actually start to try to get your hands on actual footage, or at that point, I can't even remember if the internet had hardcore stuff that you could watch.
Yeah, I know hardcore stuff was out there. I know hardcore magazines were out there, but that was actually part of my, I think, enabling lies, is that I told myself, well, because I'm not interested in that hardcore stuff. I'm not really a porn addict. I just like beautiful women without their clothes on, and so justifying that the level I was engaging at was okay, not okay, but was more okay than all the other stuff that was out there. So yeah, for me, it was primarily magazines. I was a tall, big guy, played on the football team, and found that, if it was 10, 11 o'clock at night and I stopped at the local gas station, they didn't care if I was 18, 16. Like if I had $5 for the magazine, they would sell it to me. And so that was probably a monthly pattern. Moving video online was not going to happen at dial-up speed, but I did find, that at the local video store, I could rent, again, not porno movies per se, but there are a lot of movies in that NC-17 category that I looked old enough and they didn't ask many questions, and I could rent a video if I knew my family was out of town. And so that happened on a few occasions. Um, yeah. So it was, again, comparing to like what we might classify as addiction or a porn addict, the hardcore stuff. It was how I let myself off the hook to say, well, this is just that one time. And I was just curious. I'm just getting it out of my system. I actually hear a lot of guys say that now. I just needed to get it out of my system, and believed that as I got older, as I, grew in my faith, that I believed I would just mature my way out of this, that I wouldn't need it. And I'd heard from enough married guys that I knew marriage would never fix me. But I think I just believed that being older and more mature and wiser, it would just go away. And yet, actually the opposite proved to be true. So I think a lot of people have discovered that as well.
Yeah, yeah. And it's amazing how the enemy will try to play with our minds. And for those of you watching this, I just really want you to be in tune with this, because I dealt with something similar when I was single. I didn't struggle as much with the pornography, but I did struggle with masturbation quite a bit. I didn't get married, as you all know, until I was 40 years old. And so there was a long season where I was, justifying masturbating, because in my mind, it was better than pornography. So I'm not as bad as the guys that are watching that stuff. And I'm certainly not as bad as the guys who are sleeping around with other women. And I didn't realize that, what I was doing is I was having sex with myself. Right. And so that is a sin, because I'm supposed to have sex with my spouse and my wife only. Right. So be careful when the enemy kind of sends that message to try to convince you that just because you're not full blown doing what someone else is doing, that it's okay. Remember that the standard is never to compare yourself to someone else. The standard is ultimately holiness, and the standard should be Christ. So with that being said, let's fast forward a little bit. How old were you when you got married? Let's talk a little bit about that. Did the struggle kind of continue? I'm assuming it did, even into your marriage. Was it a secret? Did you come out and tell your wife? At what point? So walk me through that kind of season in your life.
Yeah. Great question. I went to a Christian college in Minnesota. My wife and I met during my sophomore year, her freshman year. Fast attraction, quickly started dating, and kind of the maybe typical Christian college story of dating for 3 years, getting engaged in our senior year. And it was during our engagement that we actually had a chapel speaker come to our school and say, hey, God desires that we be honest with one another, and we need to be honest with our spouses, and better to do before marriage than after, that people should know when they're saying for better or worse. They should have an understanding of what they're saying that to. And so he recommended kind of this airing your dirty laundry as a way to see, like, if they heard it and ran away, maybe that's evidence this isn't the right person for you, versus if they heard it and could have grace and be aware of, hey, I'm marrying you for the good and the bad. That was just going to strengthen your relationship, And so that made a lot of sense to me. On a date night, as we went out for coffee, before we went in, sat in the car with my bride to be, this beautiful gal who I believed was way out of my league and yet wanted to marry me. And I opened up, as accurately as I knew how to, my sexual history. I hadn't ever been with another woman, but I'd obviously a lot of pornography and masturbation and lust and ways that took me into various behaviors all around that self-satisfaction. And I remember her hearing that she was very naive, and she was very wide-eyed, like, I can't believe what I'm hearing, but very grace-filled, and wanting to make it work. And I think she believed that marriage would fix me more than I believed that. But I remember her asking me, well, can't you promise me you'll never do those things again? And, I remember looking over at her, this beautiful woman that I was ready to pledge my life to, and saying to her something like, I want to make that promise, but I feel like I've made that promise to myself, to God, and others in the past. And it keeps coming back in. So I'm going to try really hard, and I'm going to give it my best, but I don't know if I can make that promise. And what's so unique looking back is I was using the language of addiction, even as a 21-year-old engaged guy, saying to my wife-to-be, I don't know that I can promise I can stop doing this. It feels like it's outside of my control, even though I never would have said it that way. So we got married in the year 2000, which, by the way, was a great year to get married, because if you ever want to know how many years have you been married, right, just look at the calendar. Whatever year it is, that's what number year we're on. And it was probably 6 months into marriage that I relapsed back into viewing pornography, actually on my office computer at work. at the college I was working at. And I felt the same guilt, the shame, of course, now more than ever before, because my wife and I had very good physical intimacy. I mean, the sex life that we shared early on was what we had hoped for. We didn't have struggles or problems or issues. It was going well. And so the shame of like, how could things be going so well at home and yet I still seek this out? So I felt that conviction that I needed to tell her. And I don't remember if I did it right away or waited a couple of days, but eventually got it out that, hey, I've viewed pornography and masturbated, and I'm so sorry. And this is what I'm going to change. Here's the boundaries I'm going to implement. Here's the things I'll do differently so it won't happen again. And that really started a 10-year pattern in our marriage where I would go through seasons where I would do really well, several months at a time, 6 months, and then relapse, and other seasons where it was every month. And I wasn't confessing every time, but because I had been honest in our engagement, I would periodically, at least every 6 months, get the courage, or maybe the guilt would get so strong that I'd come to her and say, hey, I'm so sorry. This is still happening. But it's not about you. It's not your fault. It's not because of our marriage. This is a me problem and I'm working on it and I promise it'll get better. And I would try to convince her that I was going to be okay. But, after 10 years of that, as you might imagine, my words didn't carry much weight with her. And she was pretty done with me and the marriage. And, in fact, what she said was, it's not that I hate you, but I hate the way this makes me feel. And because I don't know if it's ever going to change, it's 10 years now and it just keeps happening, I don't know if I can stay around the pain. And those are pretty frightening things to hear from a woman that you truly, sincerely love and I wanted to honor her. I wanted to respect her. And yet this kept happening. So it was pretty crushing to her and to our marriage.
Thank you for sharing that. Wow. A couple of follow-up questions that I really want you to speak into. The first one is, why does marriage not fix the problem of pornography, right? Because a lot of times when you're single and celibate, in your mind you think, man, if I could just get married, then I can have regular sex, I can get a release, hopefully whenever I want to, and that'll tame the beast that's inside of me. So why does marriage not solve the pornography issue? That's the first question. Yeah. And then I'll follow up that with another one, just so I don't forget. And that's the fact that, how did this truly make your wife feel? You mentioned, that she was done and just things like that. But we'll circle back to that in just a second. But why does marriage not solve it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alan. And I think it's a real fallacy that a lot of men and even women can carry, is thinking, my need is for sex, my need is for sexual release, and when I have that, I'll be fixed. But the truth is, your need is not for sex. That at a much deeper level, we have a need for emotional connection, for intimacy. What we say a lot at Pure Desire is that sexual addiction or pornography addiction is an intimacy and attachment disorder. And if you're not healthy at a deep level, just having sex with your spouse doesn't guarantee that you feel true intimacy or attachment, because you can still be hiding behind your sins. You can be stuck in a whole bunch of shame. And just because you're being physically intimate with another person doesn't mean those things get addressed, because our needs for intimacy and attachment actually go back much deeper into our story, into ways that we've been wounded, into traumas that we've faced that have created in our thinking false messages that I really think the enemy uses against us, uses against the people of God, from their negative experiences to try to tell them there's something about you that is corrupted, that is worthless, that is not good enough, that doesn't measure up. And because we carry that, we're actually looking through pornography or sexual addiction, we're looking to fix that. But no amount of sex, no amount of physical intimacy ever can meet us there, because, like I said, our issue isn't with sex. One of the things that Dr. Ted Roberts, who's the founder of our ministry, he said, way back when he wrote the book Pure Desire over 20 years ago, that he said, marriage doesn't heal you. Marriage reveals you. Marriage reveals what's there. And I think that's the truth, is that if you bring, as I did, dysfunction into marriage, it's not going to heal you. It's going to reveal what's there. Now, marriage and a real intimate relationship with your spouse that's rooted in Christ can be a part of your healing story, and I got to see that in a powerful way. But if we just assume that, marrying this other person will fix me, I mean, we all know that that doesn't work, and it doesn't work with sex, and it doesn't work with other issues that we bring into marriage. So I think that's what we have seen and what I saw really at play in my own life. And so to the question of how did it really make my wife feel, here's the thing that she said from the first time that I told her 6 months into our marriage. She said, "It feels like you're having an affair. It feels like you're cheating on me." And I remember like, whoa, that's so unfair. And these are just fantasies and it's totally fake and it means nothing to me. And actually, it was that self-denial or the denial of the problem and that rationalization, because that's what I was doing. Really, I was rationalizing my behavior and trying to tell her, you don't understand. What really started to create change in our lives is when I was willing to accept the reality that I was the one who didn't understand, right? Because if there was any other issue in my life that my wife had come to me and said, "Hey, do you know when you spend money that we don't have, it feels like you're cheating on me. Or when you stay late for work, it feels like you're cheating on me." Anything else she would have said, I would have been like, "Oh my goodness, I don't ever, ever want you to feel that way. I will change it." But in this area, I was so deluded that rather than hearing her reality, I was stuck in my, well, you just don't understand because that's, an affair. Come on. But that's truly how not only does it make her feel, but as I've now worked with hundreds of couples and in their marriages, that's a pretty common theme that women say this feels like adultery, it feels like an affair, and it makes me feel like I'm not good enough. And why am I not good enough for you? So that was her reality.
Yeah, yeah. And to your first point about why marriage doesn't solve it, and some of you may have heard me say this before, but men who are struggling with an extreme case of lust or even as deep as pornography, the issue is that these men are really, they feel like they need both frequency and variety, right? So frequency, I need it a lot. I need it, I need it on a regular basis. My body is craving it, right? Okay, good. Marriage is supposed to solve the frequency problem, right? And that's the nature of a healthy sex life in your marriage, right? But the problem is we've got this other beast over here that not only desires frequency, but we also desire variety, something new, something novel, something different, something fresh, something crazy, something out of the box, something that we've never seen before, someone that's a little different, built a little different, has a bigger this, has a smaller that, looks a little different, has this skin tone, whatever, right? And the problem is that marriage can only solve one of these two desires. It cannot solve the variety issue because it's the same person, no matter how beautiful they are, no matter how attracted you are to them, it's not going to solve that issue. And so, guys, that's the reason why I don't look for marriage to be the main fix to the things that you are dealing with. Now, I want to fast forward a little bit because this is really the heart of your story, which is the fact that you actually became a senior pastor of a church. So tell us a little bit about, that. We understand that right now you and your wife are working through some issues with this in your marriage, but how old were you when you actually became a senior pastor? And I'm going to let you kind of drive the car for a little bit. Tell me a little bit about, was this issue continuing in your pastoring? You said 10 years, so I'm assuming it was. Yeah. How deep did it go? And I'll circle back with a few other questions after that. But tell us about that situation.
Yeah. Well, and just to speak real quick to what you said there, Alan, about that need for variety, that's an area where pornography becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because the more we seek out variety through even lust and fantasy, we're actually training our brain to want more of that. Where the truth is that God designed our brains for monogamy. And the more that we design our brains only to be triggered and turned on by our spouse, there are actually, and this is the coolest thing like about brain science, there are actually brain chemicals being released to reinforce that bonding and connection with your spouse that makes it possible that over time, you actually need less stimulation from the same source, your spouse, to reach the same level of pleasure or excitement. Where conversely, if we're seeking out pornography and training ourselves for variety, that same brain chemical is being confused and actually starts to work against us. So that over time, if we're trapped in fantasy or pornography, we need more, we need greater stimulation, more variety in order to reach the same level of pleasure or excitement. And so you see the way it's a trap. I mean, I think it's the enemy's trap because the deeper we go, the deeper it will take us, because it never can satisfy us the way God designed a marriage and a monogamous relationship to bring satisfaction. So I wanted to mention that because it's an area where I think we see the beauty of how God created our brains to work, but also just the evil of how the enemy can hijack that for evil purposes. So keep that in mind as you ask yourself the question, well, how important is it that I kick pornography out the door in my life? I'd say, we can look at not just the Bible, but we can also look at the brain and say it is pretty important. So to go back to our story, my wife and I were at a church in Southwest Washington. I was the associate pastor for 3 years, and then our lead pastor felt called to take a job in Hong Kong, an international church. And after a year of searching and interim, they asked if I would become the senior pastor at the ripe old age of 26. And against my better judgment, I prayed and said, God, what do you want us to do? And he said, move forward. So I became the lead pastor. And what really happened in that season, I would say up to that point in time, I felt some freedom to be more real with other men in the church. But there was a mantle or a weight that I felt in being the senior pastor that was like, okay, I have to be the guy. People have to know that I have my stuff together, that I can lead, that I can do this job. And so the only safe person to confess to any longer was my wife, because she already knew. She'd been with me through this journey. So I would say it's not that my struggle changed in those years. I was still stuck in that every couple of months, have a binge back into pornography, feel terrible about it, never living a double life where I'm keeping material or having this stash. It was always view things and then delete it all, flush the browser history, get rid of it, confess. What changed was how my wife also felt trapped of like, I can't tell anybody either. We are all alone in this struggle. And I think that's what also so it was about 5 years of that as the senior pastor that brought her to the point of saying, I think I need to get out because I feel like I'm suffocating. And it was actually in that season where she was starting to use language like that, which, by the way, it terrified me. I was petrified that I was a relapse away from losing my marriage and I didn't know what to do about it, because I was convinced I can build all the walls around me to try to keep pornography away, but I knew I was only a moment away from being in the wrong state of mind at the wrong time with the wrong opportunity, and I could choose that horrible path again, and I was fearful it would end my marriage. It was in that season that by God's providence, we heard about Pure Desire Ministries for the first time. I was actually at a conference for pastors, and they had brought in, within my denomination, they had brought in Ted Roberts and Pure Desire Ministries to talk about a pathway for pastors to get healthy and within certain parameters to stay in ministry. And they made this presentation to about 300 pastors. And what was crazy as I look back is I was in the midst of that struggle. My wife was in the middle of her pain. And as we heard this amazing offer that, truly felt like they had designed it for us, specifically for us. But I sat there with my arms crossed, looking around this room of about 300 pastors, and I thought, I hope the men who are really struggling are listening to this offer, because this sounds like a great deal for them, right? And it goes back to what you said earlier, that I was convinced there were men struggling way worse than me. They were looking at pornography daily, or they were into the hardcore stuff. Those were the people with the real problem. But me, I was in the middle of a couple of good months, and I was so trapped in the fog of denial that I was ready to say, I'm good to go. But at that same conference, by God's providence, sitting right next to me was my wife. And what I was hearing as a good opportunity for other people, my wife was hearing as a 10-year answer to her prayers, because she had been praying, God, would you help us find someone that knows a path to freedom? And for the first time, someone was standing up saying, there is a way to be free. And so with her gentle nudging, we ended up taking the next step to engage with Pure Desire Ministries and begin a healing process. So that was really kind of the journey for us in that season.
Yeah. I'm going to circle back to that in just a second, but I have to ask this question. So, in the past, particularly when I was single and I was struggling with masturbation, I was always at the same time concurrently teaching, preaching, leading worship, thriving in ministry, right? And I don't know if you did this or not, right? I don't know if you did this or not, but I know I tried to play these little games with God. Typically I knew that I was not able to teach, preach, or lead worship with my conscience being tainted, with my anointing, if you will, being kind of tainted by sin. So anytime I knew I was going to have to teach or preach, I would always lay off the masturbation, lay off the sin struggle for like 2 or 3 days, just to kind of get my mind right and try to, make sure that I was able to stand before God and before the people with a clean conscience, so that my sermon wasn't tainted by these thoughts of guilt and shame and things like that. And then shortly after that, I'd be like, oh, okay, I can let my guard down. I can relax a little bit. I can kick back. I just preached a sermon. I'm feeling good about myself. I can indulge in this type of sinful behavior for the next couple days, because I'm not going to have to stand in front of the people for another 4 or 5 days after that, and I'll get myself clean later. And I played these games for years where I was struggling with this. So my question to you is, how can you resonate with that? And also, how did you manage being, able to actually preach and teach the Bible to people, knowing that you had this very secretive life?
Yeah, I can totally relate, Alan. And just, I think in that season, I had a unique ability to compartmentalize, as many men and women do who struggle with these issues. We kind of confine that to a part of our life. Like, this is something that happens, and I have a little problem with it. But basically, my life, all these other things, I'm loving my wife and kids, I'm preaching well, I'm being kind to others, I'm serving in our community. I was a high school coach, and I've never crossed a physical line. I would never do that. So yeah, I've got this one little problem over here, but I think my mind would actually do that. I don't know if I did it consciously, but just as a way that I could live with myself, right? That I could preach on these themes of God's holiness and righteousness, and know that, hey, I really mean it when I say it, because this is just that one problem. And maybe a unique, even twistedness to it was using it as a way to create sincerity. Because like when I would struggle, I was very adamant to take that to God, to confess, like I said, to get rid of everything. There were even people I had in my life, a good friend from college, a mentor that I could go to and confess. And so when I would talk about, the forgiveness of God, I would be doing it out of, and this week, God forgave me for looking at pornography. Of course, I would never say that publicly, but in my mind, it actually became part of like the veracity, the truth of what I was preaching, because like, in a way, I felt like I was living it. The other thing is the way in which I felt I was doing exactly what the church had taught me to do, is sin. The church had taught me to confess James chapter 5, confess your sins one to another and you will be healed. And so I was confessing to God. I was being more open with my wife than pretty much any guy I knew. I was being open with, that friend from college. Like, I'm confessing my sin. And so it's like, I'm doing my part. And the fact that I'm not free yet, I don't know what to do with that. Maybe that's actually God's fault that he's not delivering me. So I think that was the other way that kind of enabled the behavior is no one had given, up to that point in my life, no one had given me any other pathway other than pray, confess, read your Bible, and trust God to walk in purity. And hopefully this time it's going to work. Because like I said, every time was going to be the last time. And I wasn't just saying that to be flippant or to lie to others. I mean, I was lying to myself. But I believed the lie, that this is going to be the last time. I tell people, I feel like I found 1,000 different ways to fall into the same sin. And because every time it was just a little different, it was like, oh, okay, now this time I figured that one out, I'll never go there again. And then the next time, okay, now I figured out that one, now I won't go there anymore. And it enabled it to continue happening, partly because I thought I dealt with it and it was going to be the last time. Only, as a good friend of mine says, if last time wasn't the last time, this time probably won't be either. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit. You're serving, you're preaching, you're teaching. At what point did this sin, the secret sin, become evident or public, if you will, to your church at that time, and how did they respond? How did they respond to their senior pastor being found out or discovered, and did you confess that to them, or is it something that they kind of found out from your involvement with Pure Desire or whatnot?
Yeah, so, as I said, as an associate pastor, I had felt more freedom to be honest. And there had actually been on 2 occasions, times where with our church elders, I had confessed, hey, I struggle with lust and pornography. And I think I probably sugarcoated it enough that they didn't realize the depth of it. But it had created some honesty there, and they had responded with a lot of grace. And so when my wife and I heard about this opportunity with Pure Desire, I felt like that was a moment I needed to go back to them and be real. And so at the beginning of that, I said, hey, because many of these were the same elders as when I was the senior pastor as when I had been the associate. So I was able to say, I've been honest with you about this behavior in the past, and I feel like you need to know it's continued to happen. And my wife and I are going in for help, that we are signing up for this 1-year counseling program. We're going to be in groups. And I just want you to know, and I want to know if I would have your support in walking through it. And again, I think they were just incredibly gracious to say, we believe in you, we believe in your future, and we believe you're worth investing in. And they said, just like we wouldn't kick someone in our church to the curb for struggling, we don't want to kick our pastor to the curb because he's struggling. And so not only did they support us, they actually ended up paying for a part of the counseling, which I didn't even ask for. I was amazed that, and not out of the church budget. They wrote checks from their own personal bank accounts to say, we believe in you and we want to see you get healthy. And so that was pretty awesome. So then we walked through that season, pretty intense season, a year where I'm in counseling every week. My wife and I were in groups every week. And at the end of that year, Pure Desire Ministries, my counselor, Ted Roberts, said, hey, you're ready to tell your story to your church. Brought that to the elders with my denominational boss was there, and we all talked through where I was at, how sobriety had taken place, that there was freedom, and we agreed, like, okay, we're gonna share this with the church. So during a Sunday service, as I was preaching through Romans 7 and using the passage of Paul wrestling with why do I do what I don't want to do, I ended the sermon by saying, I think I can bring some unique perspective to this passage. I said, because for 15 years, I've had an addiction to pornography. And I want to tell you about how God has brought healing into my life so that we can bring healing into our church.
Wow.
And, you could have heard a pin drop in the room when the senior pastor says, I've been addicted to pornography. And I had been warned by my mentor, Ted Roberts. He said, when you get this honest with your church, there's a percentage of people that they probably won't come back. This is too much. It's too honest. They want their pastor to be up on that pedestal. But if anybody, and I wasn't at a huge church, there were 300-400 people in the room that day. If anybody ever left over my disclosure, I still don't know about it. But what happened instead was, following that, week after week after week, people who would come up after the sermon, because once I told my story, it wasn't like, okay, there's the story and now we'll never talk about it again. I just felt like I needed to continue to find ways to integrate what I was learning about healing, about the brain, about how it all connected to the Bible, about how our wounds and trauma drive behaviors. I just kept bringing it into the sermons and telling more of my story. And what would happen week after week is how people would come up, and usually with tears in their eyes, they would say, thank you. Because if you're the senior pastor and you can tell your story, then I know it's safe for me too. So when I stood up and said, hey, we're starting groups for men and women who struggle, it wasn't like, hey, those people who have that problem, you black sheep of the family, go over there. It was like, no, I'm leading the group. So if you want to join, here's my phone number, text me, I'll give you the information. You don't need to tell your family. We'll keep it very anonymous and confidential. We'll try to get you started and give you some tools so that you know how to tell your family if you're struggling, or tell your spouse. But when the senior pastor is leading the way, it just opened what I would say the floodgates for healing. And over the next 5 years, I'm not over-exaggerating when I say that it was by far the most effective discipleship ministry we had ever run. And we didn't set out to do that. It's not like I had some master strategy of, okay, here's how we're going to disciple people. And it was just like, man, I'm finding healing. I know other people struggle with pornography. We're going to run groups. And so we did. And what we watched happen is how when men and women would join those groups, it goes into such a depth of what's really driving your behaviors that not only did it help them figure out their issues around lust and pornography, it created change in all kinds of areas in their life. And I began to watch that all of our new small group leaders, our worship leaders, even the people I was hiring to serve on staff with me, were people that were going through these groups, because when they would emerge and feel free from pornography, or they'd be finding healing from the betrayal in their marriage, they were so excited and free, and they were just open-handed before God saying, Lord, what do you want me to do? You want me to serve? I'll do it. You want me to be a part of the ministry? I'll do it. And it was like leadership training on steroids, because we had more leaders come out of that than anything I had tried. I'd done the Willow Creek Summits, I'd done elder training programs, I'd done book studies, and all of those I think had some success. But compared to just getting people healthy and free in their sexuality, not even close.
Yeah.
If you want leaders in your church, get them free from their sexual brokenness. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Wow. Speaking of that, obviously I know Pure Desire, which, guys, we're going to tell you a little bit more about that in just a second, so hang tight with us. But obviously, I'm sure there's so many different things that you learned in terms of principles and different truths that you have to embrace. But ultimately, how did you, I know this is a loaded question, but how did you truly break free from this? And what does that freedom look like? Because some people might say that freedom means I'll never ever look at it again. Other people will mean that, I'll never look at it again, and I'll never have the desire to look at it again. I don't even have to protect myself because I'm free, I'm delivered, right? Other people will say, well, I've not been looking at it, but it's a daily thing I have to fight against. And other people might see freedom as, well, I do it every so often, but doesn't have a hold on me. So first of all, talk to, how did you really break free? And I think that's what is going to impact those who are watching. And then second of all, what does breaking free actually look like or mean for a Christian?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alan. And I remember I asked Ted Roberts that same question. I said, why did this work? Because when I say that I fought, in my teenage years and as a young adult to get free, I had very sincerely did everything I knew how to do. I'm like, why did this work? And he really brought up how the process helps you recognize, again, the way that your wounds and trauma from early childhood have created false core beliefs. And I really think the enemy reinforces those false core beliefs about worthlessness, shame, a false identity, a sense that we have to perform really well to be loved. And so if we only focus on stopping the behavior, which is what most people do, it's like focusing only on the tip of the iceberg, which we all know in that illustration, the vast majority of the iceberg is below the surface. So when we're struggling with pornography or lust or any kind of unwanted sexual behavior, what we see is just the tip of the iceberg. What's driving it are all of these emotions that we have, this trauma and woundedness that has created lies. And if someone doesn't walk with us into those places, and with the power of Christ's love, help us see the lies we're listening to, what are the stories that have created them, and how do we invite God's healing presence into those experiences, we're not going to have long-term success. And so the Pure Desire groups and counseling helped me find healing in those deep places. But the other part of it was really that group environment, because a Pure Desire group isn't just people sitting in a room saying, did you struggle this week? Did you relapse this week? Did you look at porn this week? It's much deeper into looking at what is the process that I take into relapse, because long before anyone ever relapses, they've taken 18 other steps along the way. And in a Pure Desire group, you learn to recognize your pattern.
Wow.
You learn to be honest about your pattern much, much earlier in the process. So that what I've told people often is, I used to think integrity was this, that Christian integrity was being in front of your computer late at night or on your phone, tempted to relapse and look at pornography, and a man of character could put the phone down or close the computer and walk away and not relapse. What I discovered is that at that point, you are fighting a losing battle with sin, with Satan, with your brain chemicals, and your past pattern that are physically pathways that have been written into your brain circuitry. Now, that's not to justify and say, oh, it's no big deal if you relapse. but you're like battling a train already running down the tracks at 50 miles an hour. What I discovered is that a man of integrity is able to see that moment coming from miles away and redirect the train as it leaves the station to never be sitting alone in front of a computer late at night tempted to look at pornography. That's what healing looked like. And that only came because in a weekly group environment, I learned to be honest about my patterns, where they started, and what I needed to do to redirect them early on. And usually that meant getting in touch with other men in the group that could support me, being honest about what I was struggling with. Because what I also found, and what you've discovered in a Pure Desire group, most people's addictive pattern does not start with sex or lust. And here's what I mean by that. Most people recognize that when I have the opportunity to sin, when I have the opportunity to look at porn or masturbate, I don't always give in. So I ask the question like, well, sometimes why do you have the strength to say no, or are you just not even tempted? And it's because there are certain times where my emotional state of mind, where I'm feeling unwanted, disrespected, not noticed, not seen, not valued, not heard, that emotional state of mind is actually what creates the desire for sex or pornography as a false substitute to get what I truly need. And so if we never see where it's coming from, we can just keep fighting against lust and pornography all day, but our brain at that brokenness level will still be looking for something to fix the pain. So that's what created real change and freedom, is I first of all discovered where the pain was, recognized how to process that pain in a safe, confidential environment with other men who are walking that same process, and then discovered pathways how to take that pain and brokenness to God and others in a healthy way versus just trying to fight the temptations, to go and look at pornography. So I think that was maybe the heart of how I would describe transformation. And I think for most people that goes well beyond the typical accountability group where we're just asking, did you look at pornography this week?
Yeah. And to add on to that, I know a lot of times, I would use it when I was single, just the lust piece or the masturbation piece of a reward system. Hey, I've worked really hard this week. Hey, or hey, here's another little lie that the enemy used to tell me. Hey, you've gone 4 or 5 days. So, you deserve it now. And, it's not like you just did it yesterday. So, the fact that you've made it for 5 days, you deserve to kind of indulge a little bit tonight. And then, you can get back on your righteous track for the next 3 or 4 days and you use it as a reward system, fatigue. There's all sorts of lies that kind of come in, to tempt us to do these things. So Nick, just as we kind of wrap this up here, tell us a little bit about, what are some resources? I know you have a book that you've written. So tell us a little bit about that. And, just tell us about some resources that you recommend. Obviously, Pure Desire. We'll put links to all this stuff in our description. But tell us a little bit about that and how people can support what you're doing.
Yeah, so a lot of what I've shared here, a lot of my story can be found in my book, Setting Us Free. I wrote that just because I felt like I needed to capture some of the emotion of it, some of the heart of it, before, the further we get away from those moments, the more that we kind of forget how intense it was and how God worked. And so I wanted to tell our story, but maybe more importantly, I wanted to show in Scripture where I feel like I discovered this isn't just my story, this is our story. And this is where God has been at work in people's lives, even in the pages of Scripture. And so it's way more than just my story. It's an attempt to say, how is this all of our story where God can be at work? And so I'd love to have you check that out. As I've also said throughout my story, it was Pure Desire groups and counseling that were so vital to that healing process. And we have Pure Desire groups that are meeting in over 800 churches around the country. I think we're in 49 of the 50 states and 23 countries. So at our website, you can find if there is a group near you. And if you can't find a group physically close to you, we also have a system of groups meeting online that you could join and be with people from all over the country walking through a process of healing and change. And we limit those groups to just 7 people because we want them to be close-knit, confidential, where you are weekly participating, not just sitting and listening to people, but you're an active participant. And so we really limit the group size so that everyone is engaged in their healing. So you can check that out at puredesire.org. The other resource, Alan, that I really like to direct people to, so much of what you and I have talked about today for many people is like, it's new. It's a way of seeing our struggle through a biblical lens that maybe many of us haven't heard about. And so that question of how do we change the way we think about lust and pornography and masturbation and the struggles that we have? At Pure Desire, we created an 8-week video curriculum that is appropriate for men, for women, for parents, for pastors. And whether you struggle or not, it's an equipping tool just to help everyone understand, how does sexual addiction work? What does healing look like? And so that 8-week video series is called Sexual Integrity 101. It's the 101 course, the basics, the introduction. And I would love to have you check that out at our website, either something for you to watch personally or as a tool that your church could use, just to say, we need to start talking about this topic. Because as we said back at the beginning, Alan, this conversation is not being had nearly often enough. Statistics would say 60 to 70% of men in the church struggle with pornography. 25 to 30% of women in the church struggle with some form of unwanted sexual behavior. And so we need safe environments in the church, not just sending people away, not just go somewhere else, but a group that could meet in the church to work towards that healing, freedom, and recovery. And Sexual Integrity 101 can be that launching point for churches to begin to understand the issue and then direct people into those healing groups that really are meant to be run in and through the local church. So that's what we're all about. My healing story is really what we're trying to replicate in every church around the country.
Yeah, guys, hopefully you guys hear that. Like, we are not leaving you without resources and tools and things that you can use, because guys, I'm telling you, if you get a chance, all right, I'm going to also put a link to a video that I did, I want to say about a year ago. It's called 10 Subtle Ways That Pornography is Just Slowly Destroying Your Life. And I talk about a lot of different ways. And if you can understand the danger and how it's actually eroding away at the core of who you are, that oftentimes is enough to really motivate people to get the help that they need and ultimately experience victory. So guys, you've got the tool, Setting Us Free. You've got that wonderful book by Nick. You also have this amazing online course, this curriculum that you can go through, Sexual Integrity 101, which I know is going to be an absolute blessing. But guys, let me also tell you about another tool that I personally use as well. You've heard me mention it before, Covenant Eyes. I am a stickler. I'm just a great supporter of Covenant Eyes. As you heard earlier in the beginning and intro of the video. But essentially, guys, I have this installed on all of my devices because essentially what it does is that I'm able to choose other men to be an ally for me, so that if I were to venture off and view certain inappropriate images and things like that, somebody will get a daily or weekly or monthly report, or however often I set that up, and they can see, and of course the images are blurred because we don't want to cause them to fall, but they can see, how did I do this week? Did Alan look at this? Did Alan look at that? But the better thing that they have, other than just the ally system, is internet filtering, right? And once again, Nick talked about, hey, don't wait until you get there in order to try to figure out whether you're going to yield or not. Like, take strategies beforehand to make sure that you're not even tempted, right? And so one of the ways to do that is, don't wait until you click on XXX.com and you see all these images just popping up in front of you. Everything is so fast paced and you see all these movies and all this stuff and you're like, oh, I want to watch that. Oh God, give me the strength, but oh, I really want to yield. No. If you get Covenant Eyes installed on your devices, it will block you from even getting to those things, because once you get to those pages and your mind and your eyes start to see those things, it is almost impossible. I'm not going to say impossible, but it is, you're really limiting yourself to be able to actually yield, because you've already, your mind is, that dopamine has already been released. Your mind is already just like a kid in a candy store. So if you can cut that off and keep those images from coming in, guys, Covenant Eyes is a great way to do that. You can get 30 days free of charge for 30 days. Click the link in the description box below and simply use the promo code Alan Parr, and the good people over at Covenant Eyes will hook you up. Nick, do you have any final parting words for us?
I just want to encourage you, if you're someone that's struggling, and as you've heard Alan and I talk, you realize a lot of the same excuses that he and I have brought up, you're using. I'm not as bad as others. Last time's going to be the last time. I'm getting this figured out. Just take it from me. This isn't something that gets better on its own or just because you're trying harder. It takes a level of engagement with God and others that you need to step into. And I would just encourage you, don't wait. Don't stay in this place where you think you're going to figure it out on your own, because so many men have been where you are and they had to wait and watch it get worse until they had the courage to reach out for help. And so my prayer is, if you're a pastor, I want you to know, while it may require some challenges to figure out, how do I face this within my context? Will my career be at work or in jeopardy? The blessing of being able to minister without this weight in your soul is so worth it, that freedom and healing is possible. And there are groups like Pure Desire that are here to help. And so don't just live in the lies or the denial any longer, because the freedom is possible. And I'm here along with many others to say, I've gotten to experience it. And I wish in my own story, someone had told me these things 5 years, 8 years earlier, so that I could have had more time to walk in that freedom versus allowing the pain to accumulate in my life the way it did. So if my story, if this episode can help you engage in your healing sooner, then it will all have been well worth it.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick, so very much for being a guest today on The Beat. Praying for you, praying for Pure Desire, and praying for your family and everything that you do, praying for the success of your book and all the resources that you provided for us today. So guys, once again, I pray that you all, ultimately praying for you all as well, that the Lord really truly gives you the victory. The Bible says, whom the Son sets free is truly free indeed. That means
Amen.
that God can allow you to be free. But the first thing that has to happen is that you have to admit that this is not just something you struggle with. This is an actual problem that you need help. And then the second thing, most importantly, is that above and beyond everything, you have to believe in your heart that freedom is not only possible for you, but it is what God intends for you. Because if you don't believe that you can truly get free, the enemy's got you already right where he wants you to be. And I can say, and Nick can say, and men all over the world can say, that if they can experience freedom, you can too. I'll see you guys in another video. Bye for now.